All right, everyone, welcome back. I have Navy Top Gun instructor and soon to be thriller author Jack Stewart today. Jack, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on, man. And I appreciate the early review of Unknown Rider, which you have in the background and I have right here
Nice. Looks
in
good in
my
your hands,
hands.
man.
Yeah, it's amazing. Um, I got a lot of questions because it's such a technical book, and I got to get into your mind and find out kind of how you did it. But what I want to ask first is, how did you like get into writing? When was that moment where you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do post Navy service?
You know, I've always had the bug to write. Growing up, for me, libraries and bookstores were my toy stores. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
every time I walked into a library, I felt like, I could go anywhere. You go fantasy worlds, go out to outer space, undersea, whatever I was interested in, I could find it in libraries. So um, I was always a voracious reader, and it was just something that I continued in my time in the service and then beyond. And after a while, I was like, I've got my own stories I'd like to tell. So it wasn't something that I really set out to do seriously, I think, until probably 2020. I'd been working on my first novel for probably like 5 or 6 years. And I just had some time on my hands, like almost everybody else did, that was, kind of shut down due to the pandemic. And
yeah.
so I decided to take it seriously at that point, and really kind of delved into how to actually make a story work. So that's when it started for me, and for all aspiring writers out there. Save the Cat writes a novel. For me, was the book that told me I can actually do this. Because before, my writing was kind of meandering all over the place, and when I picked that book up, something just resonated with me, and so after finishing it, that's when I finished my first novel.
When I pitched a book to my publisher who picked up my nonfiction, I pitched him a nonfiction and a fiction, and the fiction is like a small remnants of what I have today in a polished work. And I really thought like fiction is going to be fun. It's going to be easy. It's just telling a story. Nonfiction is going to be hard because I got all the facts on paper. You got to be correct, or people are going to check you if you're not. Like you got to come from a subject matter expert. And they picked up my nonfiction out my fiction. I was kind of bummed, but looking
Yeah,
back on it now, and I'm like, thank God they passed on it, because if they would have picked that up and published it, that would have been it. There's just been one
yeah.
and done, because it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. It's much more difficult to tell a story and have layers and
Mhm.
depth. And you know very well, you've been writing like crazy lately. But just to do that, like I then turned into a student and I started going back and rereading old Thor books. I
Yep.
read Savage Son probably 4 or 5 times
Yeah,
just
it's my favorite one.
to grip that grit that Jack really got in there. And then, some old Flynn books, some Kyle Mills stuff that he wrote, and just started going through all some of my old favorites. And just how did Clancy do it? How did so and so do
Yeah.
it? And just becoming a student. And when you read it again, as someone who wants to write, as an author, as somebody who's looking at it, you look at it with a different lens. Um,
Yeah.
and for me, that was a game changer. But who shaped and kind of molded your writing style? Was there anybody who's heavily influenced?
You can't really see all the books, but I have every Clancy novel, including all the authors that have continued in his legacy since his passing. For me, Clancy was everything growing up. I waited for his books to come out.
Yeah,
I read his nonfiction books, and I've read all of them several times since then. And it's funny because the type of storytelling he did probably wouldn't fly with today's readers. Today's readers are the TikTok generation, and
yeah,
their attention span is pretty short. So um, I've had to mold kind of the stories that I want to tell to fit, that shorter attention span that I think most readers have now. The last thing I want is to bore somebody with some of the details that Tom Clancy liked to provide. You
yeah.
could pretty much learn how to make a nuclear reactor when you were done reading his books, and
Yep.
And so I want to give enough technical information to make it to maybe introduce the reader to something that they might not be familiar with. Because that was one of the things I liked about reading, right? Is I learned something new. I mean,
Yeah.
even in a fiction story, you can still learn a lot about how the Navy's organized, how the Army's organized, how the Air Force is organized, how a plane works, whatever it is. I felt I learned a lot from him, and so I wanted to continue that. But but I'd say some of the modern storytellers now are, Jack Carr is probably one of my favorites. Mark Graney, obviously, Brad Taylor, Don Bentley. I mean, there's so many fantastic guys, and I've been able to call many of them my friends now,
Hmm.
and it's for a kid that thought bookstores and libraries were toy stores and candy shops. I mean, I'm definitely a kid in a candy store right now because I get to read my friends' books and enjoy them. So
Yeah, I think haven't had a chance to tell Mark Greeny this yet, but when I first read The Gray Man, I didn't really like it that much. But when I read it, I was at a time where I was a really picky reader, and so it took a style of writing to keep me captured in a fiction book. So I was very very
yeah,
picky. Um, Unlike today, where I understand the different styles and I can just enjoy it for the story because I just
yeah,
understand it better. But I reread The Gray Man before the movie came out,
hmm,
and I was just like, dude, I'm missing out. Like, I can't believe I passed on this. And just the way he does his pacing, the way he layers the story. And then I read Sierra 6 and I was like,
yeah,
everything that I heard about writing was don't hop around on timelines. Don't do a lot of looking back because you're going to confuse the reader. And Mark basically said, I wrote two 80,000 word books and then I
yeah,
intertwined them. And I was like, you're not supposed to do that. Beautiful. Like,
yeah,
I never once was lost. I never once was confused on the timeline, but it wasn't simple like that you could it was meant for, simple-minded people. It was complex but you could just follow it, and I just thought, man, that
yeah.
is Mark Mark does it unlike anybody else can do it, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, he is, I think, one of the greats of our generation. And for somebody of his caliber, he could cash it in. I know Tom Colgan says this all the time about Mark, and it's so true. After knowing him, he takes it seriously every single time he writes a book. He's always pushing the boundaries, pushing the limits, striving to be better every single time. And I'm I'm up against deadlines like every other author out there now, and it's so tempting sometimes to just be like, you know, I can
Yeah.
just cash this scene in, right? Just like move on to the next one. But I hear that little voice in the back of my head saying that's what makes Mark great, and not that I could ever compare to him, but I would sure love to be in the same category one day, and so it pushes me, and it makes me want to keep um, pushing the limits and trying new things and trying to be better.
So let's talk Unknown Rider, Battleborn series. So we have many other offerings to come, but Unknown Rider wasn't kind of your first book. You have other books prior to this that you worked on, you kicked around. Like, were they in the Battleborn series or were they got other standalones? What were those about?
Yeah, no. I had two books in the series that were my first two, my first finished novel, and it was kind of funny. Once I finished the first one, it was kind of like I realized, oh, I can actually do this. I can actually write a book, and so the second one just flowed off the page. I mean, just like it was easy, right? Um, and looking back on both of those now, I think the stories were probably valid, but the way I told them, was it left a lot to be desired. I mean, I still had a lot to learn, and those you hear every published author say that they've got books that are just going
Oh,
to
yeah.
remain in the drawer,
Yep.
and those two are definitely two that will remain in the drawer. Um, but then I kind of branched out. I wrote one book, and I still to this day, it's one of my favorite books that I hope finds a home. It's sort of a supernatural thriller that involves a guardian angel and a veteran. Kind of touches on PTSD and a few other things, but it's definitely faith based. And that one that one still resonates with me, and a few other people who've read it. They keep, of all the books I've written, my beta readers, that's the one that people keep coming back and saying, "Hey, what's happening with that one?" So I hope that one finds a home one day. Um, and then I wrote two more. Both were kind of standalones, maybe the beginning of a series. And it was the last one I wrote where it actually caught the attention of my agent, John Talbot. He read it. It took place in Africa. And he read it and said, "Hey, I really like the authenticity. I really like the story. I like your writing, but nobody wants to read about Africa. So, what can you do? Can you make this take place somewhere else?" And the whole book was basically about Al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia. And I was like, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if that could take place in,
Hard to change the
California.
continent. Yeah. Like,
Yeah. So, so long story short, he signed me on what ended up being Unknown Rider, and it was really just the first couple of chapters that I had sent him, and he said, "This is great. Like, when can you have this done?" And he put me through a couple of rewrites, and then once we sold it, Seven River, they've got this fantastic developmental editor that I work with, and he had me make some pretty good changes to it as well. And in the end, I'm really pleased with the book. I mean, I think it's a fantastic story,
oh,
and
yeah.
it wouldn't have been that way if it was, like the first book I wrote, or the third book I wrote, or the
Right.
fifth book I wrote. Right? Like I learned so much along the way, and I'm still learning. I learned a lot from that book. I just finished edits on the second book in the series. Learned a lot with that one, and I'm working on book 3 right now, kind of nearing completion on that, and still challenging myself to, like Mark Groening does, just keep pushing the limits and keep learning from the past, and trying to make each book stand out on its own.
I like to bring up the subject of what people have done before they got the publishing deal or before they got the green light, because almost every author, like you said, has those books and those ideas in the top drawer that are maybe never going to see the light of day, maybe will. But
Yeah, maybe the bottom drawer too.
yeah. But the point is that they had to write. So for people out there listening who want to be a writer, want to be an
Mhm.
author, regardless of genre, you're going to have to write. Like, I know it took me years to do my nonfiction book, and I went through 4 or 5 different versions of it before the light finally came on. I said, this is it. This is the title. This
Yeah,
is the concept. And then I could just roll with it. And even then, it was edits and changes. But it's a work. It's a work, and you're
yeah,
going to have to love to do it, because you're going to do a lot of writing and a lot of editing and a lot of cutting. But then you get something like you did who catches the eye, and then you get the, hey, well, what else do you have in your back pocket? Well, I got Unknown Rider, and so Unknown Rider was not finished when
no,
your agent said, hey, I'll take it.
no, it was not done, and I think that probably contributed to some of the rewrites that I had to do, because he said, "Yeah, it would be cool if maybe you had something like this and something like that." And I was listening to him, going, "Okay, that's what he wants, right?" And at the time, I didn't have an agent, so I'm going to do whatever he says. And I didn't really follow the story the way I was going to go. I was really trying to give him what he wanted, and it showed, right?
Mm,
It wasn't a good story. It really wasn't. Looking back on it, I think there were a lot of individual scenes that were really good, little action sequences that were really good, but there was, what he said, it was lacking the connective tissue to make it a cohesive story.
okay.
And so every time that happens, every time he had me rewrite it, or my developmental editor has me rewrite it, I go through a phase of mourning of about maybe a week where I'm just completely pissed off and grumpy, and then the wheels start turning again. And I start to put my pride aside and look at it objectively and go, yeah, they're right, and um, when it's your baby, it's hard to take that criticism. And
Yeah.
but I attribute my books, if they're good, I attribute them to everyone else that made it good. If they suck, I own all the responsibility. So send me all the hate mail, but everyone else gets all the credit.
Well, I can tell you what, man, it's a very technical, very thrilling first debut book. Like it really, and it doesn't read like a debut book. And I say that as a compliment. I don't say that, ugly. I say it as, man, it reads like a seasoned author. It reads like the fifth or sixth book, an established author who has an established storyline, and it's just legit. It's technical, which I want to ask you about. It reminded me
Mhm.
of that. It reminded me of Clancy. It reminded me of that technical, like you're learning. I felt like I was in a cockpit. I was learning how to fly the F-35
Yeah.
while I'm reading through the pages, man. It was just a seasoned book, and I hope people who are listening to this just take my word for it and go get it, because it's just it's just one of those books that you just go, I can't believe this guy's like brand new. This is brand new. This isn't his third or fourth book. This is brand new. And I hope that doesn't set the bar high and put any pressure on it, Jack. But I mean, it
Well, I
just
mean, I hope it
really
does.
impressed me.
Thank you, man. I mean, I hope it does set the bar high, right? I want to make sure that every single book that I come out with is one that people feel satisfied. What my biggest as a fan, and that's why I started out as a fan, as a
Hmm.
reader. My biggest complaint is that a lot of times the debut is so good and
Yeah.
the follow on just falls flat. And that's what sets apart, the guys that endure, like Mark Graney, and then maybe some of the other ones that have fallen by the wayside. Um, because they always say you have your whole life to write your first novel, and then maybe you only have a year to write your
Yeah,
second,
that's true.
or in my case, less than that. But um, I just because the timeline is compressed, just because I don't have as much time, I'm up against a deadline, whatever. I want to make sure that it's still a satisfying read to the audience, whoever picks up my book and takes a chance on me, and I hope that after reading Unknown Rider, they fall in love with the characters and want to see where I take them, because they're going to continue through. It's 4 books in this series. And they're going to continue through all of them.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your Navy career, because it has a lot to do with, I think, the direction that you kind of went in. There's a lot of
Yeah, it does.
similarities. The Navy plays a huge role of, obviously fighter aircraft, because you were a fighter pilot, Top Gun instructor. Um, how much of your career and your influence, went into the development of the book and the development of the characters in Colt?
Well, I'll start off by saying that so I was a graduate of Top Gun. I was an adversary pilot. So for those who've seen the movie, the original movie, I was like Viper or Jester, right? So I was the one that was playing the bad guy. I was not an instructor on the staff, so training students, but I was opposing the students in the air, and I did that job as an adversary for 13 years plus. So the end of my
Wow.
career, that's pretty much all I did. And one of the things that I took away from my career and applied it to my writing was that I wanted to give the average reader an idea of what it felt like being inside a cockpit. Um, I think the last great book that really touched on that was Flight of the Intruder by Stephen Kuntz. I mean, one of my all-time favorites. If you read that book, you get a good feeling for what it was like, flying in a squadron in Vietnam. Vietnam was when, I mean, that was how
Yeah,
many
a
years
minute ago.
ago?
Yeah.
60 years. So, but we don't have anything really modern day, current that really touches on that. And that was the challenge for me, because I really wanted to highlight the people that I served with, and the types of people I served with. And, and obviously Top Gun Maverick came out last year. Fantastic sequel to the first
Oh
movie,
my
I think.
gosh. Couldn't have done it any better.
And yeah, and I think a lot of people look at that and go, "Man, that's amazing. I would love to know more about that world," right?
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to include that, but it's hard to have tension in a cockpit of a single seat, fighter jet, and it's hard to have a whole story based around time in the cockpit. So
Hmm.
so that's what I've done with this series. I've tried to split it up into 2 parts. Basically, you have Colt Bancroft, Top Gun instructor, fighter pilot, and he kind of represents the military side, the aviation side. And then you have an NCIS special agent, Emmy King. Her nickname is Punky, and she represents the espionage side. And so you have the two worlds come together. And if anybody who's served in the military knows, espionage is always happening. And in particular, my first couple books, China is the main threat. They're very pervasive. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times in my career, whether I'm in Key West, whether I'm in Guam, Fallon, Nevada, San Diego, you name it, there are active espionage uh, activities going on that the Chinese Ministry of State Security is involved in. They're everywhere. And I really wanted to touch on that and make that the big threat in at least the first two books. So yeah, I mean, my writing definitely is informed by my experiences, but it's really more of the feelings and the emotions that you experience when you're in the cockpit that I really wanted to convey.
Well, I have to say, when I was reading through it, I felt like I was those scenes where Colt's behind the stick. I felt like I was behind the stick. When he looked over his shoulder, I felt like I was looking over my shoulder. It just felt so natural, but it was so technical too. Like you kind of felt like you knew the plane too. Like it was just very fluid. Like how much research did you have to do to really understand F-35 so that you could say I'm authentically putting not just myself but the reader in that seat?
Yeah, that's a great question because I've never flown the F-35. I have sat in a simulator of the F-35. I have several of my friends that work for Lockheed Martin.
Okay.
I've got one of my old roommates is like the chief test pilot for the JSF. But I really didn't know all those details, and so I got in touch with he was a Marine F-35 pilot, and he was the first one to go through Top Gun flying the F-35. And so I sent him the manuscript, and I said, "Hey, look, I really like it if you would take a look at this and help me out with some details that people who have flown the F-35 will go, and this guy knows what he's talking about, and that the people who haven't flown it will feel like they have." And so
Yeah.
he helped me out quite a bit. There's nothing in there that's classified. There's nothing in there that's
Sure.
secret. Everything is open source. But again, it's the emotions, it's the feelings that I
Yeah.
wanted to convey. And so he helped me out with that considerably. The book wouldn't be what it is without that. But and there's another friend of mine, former squadron mate. He was the first commanding officer for the Joint Strike Fighter Training Squadron out in Lemoore, California, and he gave it a read too. And he's like, "Where are you getting this information? like how do you know all this?" But
Well, that's
yeah,
what you
it's
want. When
that's
people read
exactly
it,
what I
you want
want.
them to question, like, how does this guy know
Yeah,
this stuff?
yeah,
Where did he get it from? Like, if you look at a guy like Mark Greaney, Brad Thor, these guys have never served in the military. Um, but if you didn't say that, you would think that they did. They were in the military. They're in some kind of intelligence service. They definitely worked for the government at some point in time.
yeah, yeah.
Not true, but not to their discredit or anything. But like the Pentagon did call Brad Thor at one point in time, said we need help strategizing. You know,
Right,
Mark's met with CIA operatives and a lot of people. He's really dug in, and to his credit, he has really dug his heels in and pushed the limit on what he can ask. You know,
right,
to lend the
right.
authenticity. I think that is a huge, huge part of it. And again, going back to Unknown Rider, you feel like you're in the cockpit. You feel like you're in the jump seat, and you're an extension of Colt because it's just so natural and fluid the way. And of course, being a pilot for as long as you are, you know that world, but getting the details and the feelings of it, it just was very to me it was very authentic, and I felt super comfortable, almost comfortable like I was flying it. The pressure was off or the pressure was on. Um, did you ever feel like at one point in time like, oh man, I don't want to push too much of, hey, I'm a pilot here, this is a pilot book on people, or do you kind of feel like there's a balance?
I mean, there always is. The last thing I want is for people to think that I'm writing Colt as if I'm writing myself, because in no way, shape, or form am I who he is. And I've heard so many people like Don Bentley's always asked this question, like, are you Matt Drake? I'm like,
Yeah.
no, but I've known people like him, and that's the absolute truth. Colt isn't based on any one person, but he's based on, I'd say, the best qualities of many people that I've served with, and I wish I could name all of them. Many of them became characters in this book and in follow-on books, and it's really just my way of kind of honoring them and saying thank you for your service. Because yeah, it's definitely not me. And in fact, not too long ago, I went to Tailhook. It was an annual convention for carrier aviators, and I ran into a friend of mine in the Denver airport who was also on his way. He had also retired, so I was able to give him an advanced copy of the book. And he texted me later and said, "Hey, I'm tearing through this thing. This is really good. Thanks for giving it to me." And it made me feel good. And I told him, I said, "It's nice to know that you're saying that, because it's always scary when somebody who knows what a buffoon I am, reads it and goes, 'Hey, this guy is actually pretty good.'" And he wrote back and said, "We're all buffoons," and that's the truth. I mean,
Yeah,
we're all professionals, but none of us are heroes. None of us are Colt Bancroft. None of us are James Reese or
right.
Court Gentry or any of that. But maybe the best of us, right?
Sure. Oh
Maybe
yeah.
we like to be that. So
So let's kind of talk about now that the book is it's going to be out. By the time people hear this, it's going to be out, or it's going to be a week from being out. We're going to put it around about a week around the release date. But how does it kind of feel that you've seen people with the book in their hand? Like I saw you at Thriller Fest, you had one in your hand, and then in the months after
yeah,
that, they started getting in other people's hands. It was on social media. Like it
yeah,
wasn't published yet, but how did it feel to have it out there in the wild, knowing, man, we're right around the corner, the months are ticking down.
right. I mean, it's pretty scary, because again, that's your baby, right? You've been working
Yeah.
on that for years, and to see other people reading it, you're like, oh man, I hope they like it. But it's also humbling too, that people are taking time out of their busy lives to read the words that I wrote, and all I can hope is that they enjoy it. That they enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it, because it was a fun experience for me. Writing still is a fun experience, even though I have deadlines and there's stress involved. It's still really enjoyable for me to see what happens to my characters and what situations they find themselves in and how they get themselves out. Um, and I don't turn on Netflix that much. I usually just sit down and write, and that's I'm pretty humbled. So I'll say, if I ever see you carrying one of my books in an airport, on an airplane, wherever I'm traveling around the country, you can guarantee that I will come up and ask if you want my autograph. And if you say no, I won't be offended.
I love that. So, as you were finishing Unknown Rider, you obviously had the idea for the second book. How much did like the final version of Unknown Rider influence how the second book kind of like came to develop and came to be?
Um, that's a really good question. It Without giving too much away, it really um, how Unknown Rider ended really informed not only the second book but the third book. Um, I'm writing the third book right now, nearing completion on it, and I'm really trying to connect all of them. Right, I want each one to be standalone, but I want, if you pick up my third book, I want you to read it, and if you're one of the few that had read the first one, you go, oh,
Okay.
that's who that guy is, or and so each book I try to leave with a little bit of a clue about where the series is going. Maybe not necessarily the next book, but where the series is going. And then the nice thing about the pace that I've been writing at is that I'm still working on edits for the previous book while I'm working on the next book. So I can go back and tweak little things here and there just to kind of make sure that I leave enough clues in an earlier book that people will find it satisfying as they read through the series. And that's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about about series books
Hmm.
is that if they connect something back several books before, to me that's very satisfying. I don't know why I find that satisfying. I like everything to be connected in some way, shape, or form. It's one of those, what is it, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever, like
Yeah,
whatever that is. Like I sort of like that, and I find that really satisfying. So um, yeah, that's hopefully you'll finish Unknown Rider and think, oh, where's this going? Because it does kind of give you some clues about something. So
I really like how when you have the secondary characters in a book that you like so much, they're like, I really hope that they consider writing a standalone for them. I
yeah,
really
for
hope that
sure.
they go explore that world somewhere, because then you really get a hold of a character and you really enjoy
Yeah.
them just as much as the main character, maybe sometimes more in certain cases. I mean, certainly John Clark became a
Hmm.
fan favorite. I mean, I would die. In fact, I was talking to Mike Madden weeks ago, and offline, he kind of told me something like when he started into Clancy Universe, like he really wanted to write a standalone John Clark book.
Yeah.
And he had a really cool, like old school Frogman John Clark idea that I was like, that is awesome. It never came to fruition for certain reasons, but I was like, oh, that
Yeah.
that that would kill. It would just
Yeah.
absolutely kill because I'd
I
buy
think it,
four or
I think
five
it
copies.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
I loved his idea, and I was like, man, I wish he could have done that because that was such a cool idea. And people love John Clark. It's a big, big character in the Ryan verse in that Clancy
Yeah.
world. I think if you can do that with those supporting characters, they don't get viewed as supporting characters. And do you ever see doing a standalone about Punky and exploring the NCIS world?
I don't know that I do. I think for me the magic between Colt and Punky is that they balance each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that they're both a little bit brash. They're both a little bit hot-headed at times, but it's a nice balance. Even when they're not necessarily together, I want them to play off each other for the reader. So maybe like you know Colt's flying headlong into something, on one side of the world, maybe Punky's showing a little more restraint on the other side of the world,
Mm.
and so I don't know that I would ever see them separating and doing something standalone. I do know there is one character at the end of Unknown Rider, and I won't say anything more to give it away, but there is one character who uh, increasingly plays a more prominent role in the series as the series goes on. And if you read the second book, that should become pretty evident who that person is.
Okay. So Unknown Rider is landing in November, and
It is.
the second book is due out in the spring or same time next year.
No, the second book is actually slated for to be published February 20th.
Oh wow.
So it's really quick turnaround, only like 3 months, and it's already available for pre-order, which is pretty funny for me because I've got two books available for pre-order on Amazon right now and none published. But yeah, that one's turned in, and I'm really really happy with it. And I think the third book is slated for the summertime next
Wow.
year, and then the fourth book would probably be the fall. So it's a very fast publishing cycle. I think like every 3 months, maybe more. I think a lot of it's going to depend on a lot of it's going to depend on Ray Porter and his schedule for recording the narration for the series.
Yeah, tell me about that, dude. Because landing him, I was like, whoa! I was pumped for you, and when you announced that, I was like, holy crap! What
Oh man,
a
I
big
am
fish
still
to
pumped.
catch.
Oh man, I so when I set out to do this writing thing seriously, I told my wife, I said that I had three goals. I won't say what all of them are, but one of them was to have Ray Porter narrate one of my books. I've been a huge fan of his. Obviously Jack Carr's books that he narrates are fantastic, but for me, one of his most amazing narrations is Don Winslow's The Power of the Dog. If any of you out there have not read that series or listened to this series, it's all about the drug war along the southern border, the power of the dog. I think he has male and female voices. He has American accents, Mexican accents, Irish accents, Italian accents. I mean, and he tells it so well that you just get so immersed in the story. Um, and so that when I heard that, I was like, man, this guy is phenomenal. I just want him. I just want him to narrate one of my books.
Yeah.
And so when they told me that that he had signed on to narrate this series, I was over the moon excited. And then he actually sent me a message yesterday saying that he really enjoyed narrating Unknown Rider, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm so jealous that you've heard it. I haven't heard it yet." You know, I'm just really excited to listen to it. But yeah, I mean, talk about a life goal, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
for
what a
me. That was
score.
a check in the block. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I love the way he does Jack Carr's books. Like he just does the narration, and he grasps the grittiness, and you can get that delineation between the character and when he's narrating, and it's just
right.
it's almost like a hollow grittiness that he has that just really captures the eeriness of moments. And yeah, he's fantastic. I know he's done some Andrews and Wilson books too, and
Yeah. Oh
um,
yeah.
crushed those as well. So that's pretty awesome. So you haven't heard it yet, then?
No, I have not heard it yet. I think messaging my publisher like every day saying, when can I listen to this?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm like, man, this Jack Stewart guy is pretty good. I'm going to listen to this and be all excited.
Yeah. So, what is kind of an accelerated release schedule? But are there plans after that? Are there ideas churning? Or the keys chomping away? Like, what's kind of the future after that?
Yeah. Well, I can't say too much about it. It hasn't been announced yet. But I am working on another series with a different publisher. And that one is a 3-book series. I finished the first book and really, really happy with it. Looking forward to getting back into that series. And, when it gets announced, I know that people should be hopefully really excited about it. But beyond these 4 books for the Battleborn series, I don't know that I will continue with these characters. I think a lot of it's going to depend on how well they're received. I mean, if people want to hear more about what it's like flying a fighter jet off an aircraft carrier, I'd be happy to tell. There's a pretty common joke that how do you know when a pilot's at a party? He'll tell you, right? I mean, there's 2 things that pilots like to talk about, and that's flying and themselves. And I won't talk about myself in my writing, but I will talk about flying. So, if these books are well received, I'd be happy to continue writing. If it's not this character, it could be another. But flying is always going to be a passion of mine. I love it, and I would love to share that love with everybody. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, so big announcements coming, accelerated release schedule, so people need to keep their eyes on social media because Unknown Rider is going to come out. Then the next 3, in a full 12 months, it sounds like you're going to have 4 of them out there. You already got 2 out there right now that they can order. You need to
Yep.
order Unknown Rider because it is excellent. I think I've ordered. I got a copy from you. I pre-ordered a copy. I got a Kindle copy that I'm gonna get, and I don't do a lot of audiobooks, just because I find it hard to pay attention and
Yeah.
really get the story. But I like Ray Porter, so I'll be getting a copy of that too. So I'll have 4 or
Yeah.
5 copies when it's all said and done, and well worth it. Jack, before I let you go though, I want you to tell people where they can go find out more, drop the newsletter, and tell them how to stay tuned in.
Yeah, they can go to my website. It's jackstewartbooks.com. And that's where you can, see some pictures of my time in the service. You can read about the books that I have out and that are coming out. And there is a newsletter sign up. I will admit that I have been pretty delinquent in putting out newsletters recently. I've really been kind of waiting to drop this exciting news about this other series that I'm writing, and obviously I've got deadlines I have to meet, and So I've been pretty bad about that, but hopefully I'll get better. Um, uh, so yeah, go to my website. You can follow me on social media. I'm on mostly active on Instagram and X now. And send me a message. I will reply to every single one that I get. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing this book in the wild and hearing what people think about it.
Well, Jack, thanks again, man, for coming on. I appreciate you, appreciate your friendship, appreciate some of the advice and stuff you've shared with me lately. I still owe you some pages that I want you to take a look at,
Yeah,
and I thank you for your time for doing that and for doing this. And we'll be in touch again, text and all that. And I wish you the luck on the launch, man.
absolutely, Jeff. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to reading those pages.